Welcome. I'm Cynthia Osborne, the director of the Child and Family Research Partnership at the University of Texas at Austin's LBJ School of Public Affairs. I'm so excited to be co-hosting the 6th Annual Texas Fatherhood Summit with our partners at the Prevention and Early Intervention Division of the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. PEI's Associate Commissioner, Sasha Roscoe, is a true leader in our state in championing the inclusion of fathers in services to support and strengthen families. And we are fortunate to be able to work with her and her amazing team again. Last year, we hosted 4 Fatherhood Fridays from my home office, and I promised you all that we'd be back together again in person this year. At that time, I'm not sure any of us were ready to comprehend what this past year would actually bring. So many suffered, and the families that we aim to support often suffered the most, from job losses to illness to losing your home or your loved one. So many of us suffered, but all of you stepped in and you found creative ways to help the families who needed you. You had to change your whole mode of delivery and ways of recruiting and supporting fathers and families, but you did it. And I truly thank you for all you've done and continue to do. And I wish we could all be together in person to take time to recognize and celebrate your efforts. But even though we remain in a virtual environment this year, you have come together once again. Last year, we increased our participation in our Fatherhood Summit from approximately 500 who participated in our in-person events in 2019 to about 1,000 who participated virtually in 2020. And this year, we doubled in size again, and nearly 2,000 of you are joining us. So welcome. Over the next 2 afternoons, we'll be discussing 3 topics that you told us were of most interest to you: how to serve fathers and families in a virtual environment, how to include fathers' voices in your programs, and how to support the co-parenting relationships of the fathers you serve. You'll also have an opportunity to speak with other providers about topics that are of interest to you, because we know that networking and sharing with others is the way we often learn best. I'm a researcher, and I and my team here at CFRP have had the privilege of studying many of the innovative programs that Texas offers to determine how well they're meeting the goals at serving fathers and families. And I know that in order for our research to be relevant and helpful, we have to spend a lot of time getting to know the providers who offer the services and the clients who use them. Listening directly from these groups is imperative, and it provides much richer insight than only looking at results from a survey or crunching administrative data. And we're bringing this same approach to the summit. For each of the 3 topics, you will hear directly from fathers to better glean their perspectives, and we'll have a panel of providers and experts who have direct experience. And we'll toss in some research too, because, I am a professor and can't avoid lecturing. So be prepared to take your notes for the quiz. But my hope is that this combination of perspectives and experience will provide you with a rich understanding of each topic. If we were in person, my team would work hard to get you all talking amongst yourselves and asking questions to our guests. And although this is a bit more difficult in a virtual environment, it's not impossible. Please use the chat function generously and let us know what you're thinking and the questions that you have. I'd like to take a moment to thank the people on my team who are most responsible for making today a reality. Bethany McKee, Eileen Dunn, and Roland Gilbert did so much. And I'd also like to thank our technical crews for all of their hard work as well. Thank you, all of you. And before we go further, though, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Mo Hobson, who is a youth and family program specialist at PEI and who oversees the Texas Fatherhood Effect program. He'd like to say a few words of welcome and to thank you for coming to today's summit as well. Please welcome Mo.
Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Texas Fatherhood Summit. My name is Mosley Hobson, and I serve as the Youth and Families Program Specialist with the Department of Family and Protective Services Prevention and Early Intervention Division. It is my greatest honor to serve alongside of partners such as BCSF, Buckner, FSC Galveston, the Pelchins Children's Center, Housing Authority of the City of Austin, Motivation, Education, and Training, Starry, and even our partners at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, our Child and Family Research Partnership. Together, we are intentional with developing community coalitions, parent engagement, parent advisory councils, and even bringing fathers to the table that they might be able to offer their feedback to ensure that the services and programming that we offer fit the needs that they need and not what we may think they need. By doing so, we help to build value and the parent voice by letting fathers know that you are important and what you bring to the table is certainly beneficial, not only for you, but for those fathers that will come to the table after you. What we'll hear during this summit is the testimonies from those fathers that we've served over 12 counties and 5 DFPS regions, saying to you just how important these services have been to them, how they have seen a change in their own lives, but more importantly, how they have built a relationship that is healthier and stronger with their children. And we know that research points back to the fact that a positive, engaging father with their children helps them mitigate risks in the long run for those children. Who knows? Now we may have created a mayor of a city. We may have helped to develop a governor of a state. That child may be the next president of the United States. Whatever it may be, I'm just so excited that we have an opportunity to let dads know that they matter. Not only do we allow for dads to know that they matter, but we understand that the family unit is important in ensuring that a child lives a healthier and thriving life. I'm excited about what we're doing here at the Prevention and Early Intervention Division, along with all of our community partners. And I just cannot wait until we get to the other side of this summit to really see now what our minds have come up with as to how we're going to serve fathers in the days to come. I hope that you come and take a journey with me. Are you ready? Well, sit back, relax, and let's journey now through the 2021 Texas Fatherhood Summit. Let's go.
Thank you, Mo. And although I know many of you are joining us for the important topics that we're going to be discussing today and tomorrow, I am certain that all of you are extremely excited to hear today's keynote speaker, Joe Jones. Joe is the founder and CEO of the Center for Urban Families in Baltimore, Maryland, and he is literally the national leader when it comes to providing programming and services to support fathers and their families. His work has influenced the national efforts to serve fathers, and he is a true inspiration to those of us in this field. I had the privilege of hearing Joe speak about his center and all the work he does nearly 20 years ago when I was still a student studying fathers and families. And he truly inspired me to continue in this line of work. I really appreciate all he has done, and I'm so glad he's going to join us today. Please join me in welcoming Joe Jones.
Wow, Cynthia, thank you so much for those really kind words. You probably stretched the truth a little bit there, but that's okay, and thank you so much for what you contributed to the field. I mean, your work, your research, what you've done to contribute to the literature is to be highly commended. And to Mo, thank you for framing this conversation and your passionate words to kick things off. And, before I go any further, let me say a belated Happy Mother's Day to all the moms and mom figures. And of course, a very healthy and hearty upcoming Father's Day to all the fathers and father figures. It's great that we are together and to be talking about families and fathers and what it means to strengthen our communities and have them healthy and whole for children. I'll talk a little bit about the work, a little bit about the underpinnings of the work around fatherhood. Well, and I want to start with a little bit about my own personal journey into this work. And I won't be able to go deep. We have a lot of time, but I have left a few items behind. There's a podcast, if anyone is interested. It's probably one of the things I feel most proud about the time I had to spend with Dr. Antonio Artelli at what's called Leadership of a Network World up at Harvard at the Kennedy School. And he and I did a podcast that encapsulates a lot of my personal journey, the work, and the organizational development related to the center. So that's there. And there's also a report on young fathers, really looking at the needs and interests of young fathers, in particular 18 to 24, that's available for those. And then congratulations, this isn't not to be understated that we are able to come together with nearly or over 2,000 registrants, doubling from last year. And I'm honored to be with you all for the 2021 Texas Fatherhood Summit. So let me start by, on the personal side, by sharing, I'm born and raised in Baltimore. I am the son, I was born to two parents. I was the only child of these two parents who were married. And unfortunately, their relationship disintegrated when I was about 9 years old. And they didn't have the tools and capacity to help their young boy, their young African-American son, to understand what was happening with the family. So that disintegration impacted me greatly. And a few years later, I succumbed to some bad personal choices, a little bit of peer pressure. You mix in some just being a knucklehead. And I ended up engaging in drug dealing and eventually using heroin, injecting heroin. And for 17 years, I was both a drug dealer and a drug addict. And it's hard to be both of those things at the same time, in and out of incarceration, and had a son out of wedlock. And very fortunately, at the end of those 17 years, I was fortunate, after many attempts at getting clean and sober and outpatient drug treatment, I landed a slot in a 1-year residential drug treatment program that I actually went into to avoid going to jail. My primary interest wasn't to stop using drugs, it was to avoid going to jail. And luckily, I was there long enough to be able to get a foundation in sobriety. And when I went to court, the judge did sentence me to 5 years in the Department of Correction, which I was fully prepared for. But then he paused and said, look, I'm gonna give you this last shot. And if you successfully complete this drug program, I'll give you an opportunity to move forward in your life. And I took that deal and haven't looked back. And with the God of my understanding and a great support system, I was able to move forward. And one of the things I wasn't sure about is what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, right? The first half, I'd given it to the street. The second half, I wanted to give to reclaiming my son, thinking about building a family, and wanted to give back to society in ways in which I was always prepared to do, but couldn't because of my addiction. And I ended up working with, as an assistant living counselor, live-in with a group of men, adult men who were largely developmentally delayed, who didn't have family or support system. And that is where I got the itch to get into human services. And I realized I didn't want to work with that population, but I did get the itch. And one thing led to another. I took that job and it parlayed it into a job at the Baltimore City Health Department, working in maternal and child health. And in maternal and child health, we were charged with reducing infant mortality and to engage pregnant women in Baltimore City. There was no interest, there was no awareness of fathers. And so as I'm working with these women to get them into prenatal care, I came across the dads, and those dads said, I need help too. The problem is I was charged with making sure that we reduce infant mortality by getting women into prenatal care. So it was a bit of a struggle to get the health department to recognize the value of these dads in the context of these women having healthy births. But undeterred, sort of like Mo's passion, I pushed forward, and eventually the health department said, look, either we're gonna have to fire this guy or we're gonna have to give him some ability to engage these dads. So they allowed me to work with a subset of those dads. And fortunately, that led to us aligning work that was happening on the national stage at the same time, particularly with the interest that the federal government had through the work of then Vice President Al Gore. So the work began to take shape. I then expanded the fatherhood program, also began to introduce workforce development into the intervention. And at the health department, we had this really robust body of work around reducing infant mortality with an intentional engagement of fathers and engaging folks in the labor market. But after 8 to 10 years, I got a little frustrated being in bureaucracy, so I moved forward with creating the Center for Urban Families, where today our mission is to strengthen urban communities by helping fathers and families achieve stability and economic success. And the reason why I start there is because the work that we did originally only focused on, and I'm trying, oh, there we go. It only focused on getting people into entry-level jobs. And then we realized that we needed to go deeper because the folks who we were working with had high barriers to labor force attachment. Dads who wanted to engage with their children, wanted to engage in employment, but they had barriers, over incarceration, child support debt that was insurmountable, no way that can, in the course of their lifetime, could it be paid off, limited and or not so positive experience with the educational system. And so we decided to build a body of work to strengthen families by getting them to be socially and economically mobile with a set of supports. And I'll come back to this on the back end of this presentation and closing with a story, about what it means to be all in with families, particularly the families who we target, who live in distressed communities, don't have great support systems, don't have access to services that can help propel them on the ready. And so we decided that as an organization, our mantra would be to dismantle poverty and to be unapologetic about it. But I want to shift a little bit to where this work kind of began in the federal government. And as you'll see on your screen, in June of 1995, President Clinton issued a memorandum. And I want to read a part of this to you. I am firm in my belief that the future of our republic depends on strong families and that committed fathers are central to those families. You can see the rest of it for yourself, and I'll go to this next paragraph. Therefore, today I'm asking the federal agencies to assist me in this effort. I repeat, all executive departments and agencies to review every program, policy, and initiative herein after referred to collected as programs that pertain to families to ensure we are appropriate and consistent with program objectives that they seek to engage and meaningfully include fathers. And you can read the rest of it, but it is all directing the federal apparatus to look at opportunities to engage fathers. And each federal agency had to develop a report that was submitted back to the president through the vice president's office. And myself, along with others, were engaged by the vice president to review those plans and to make recommendations and suggest changes to what they submitted. And that began to direct the federal government to do things like that are happening today, for example, at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, where since the Bush administration, there have been a set of fatherhood demonstration projects starting at $50 million a year under the Bush administration, increasing to $75 million under the Obama administration. And those grants and that program continues today through the last administration and now into the Biden administration. So that's an example of how an executive action by the leader of the free world helped to put in place a foundation that leads to a lot of the work that many of us are doing, including the work that Cynthia has been engaged in to provide contributions to the literature through research. Now, this is one, if any of you know Raj Chetty. So Raj Chetty is one of the country's leading demographers, right? And he has a body of work that really is tied to how people in zip codes live. And because of some examples of just poor circumstances in some zip codes, his data suggests that if you're born there, you will live there, your children will be born there, and neither the parent nor the child will be successfully economically. But what he says here is neighborhoods that have good outcomes for Black men typically have three characteristics. They tend to have relatively low poverty rates. They have a high presence of Black father presence, and they are areas with low rates of racial discrimination. It's not about whether your own parents are married or not. It's the rate of presence of fathers in your community, more generally, that's predictive of outcomes. And these are the examples of the federal government researchers contributing to a body of work that suggests that if we want families, communities, and children to be healthy and whole, we have to be very, very intentional about how we look to engage dads. Now, to make this more granular, I want to go to Baltimore. Now, this is what I call the triple threat, right? This is a map of Baltimore City, and you see a select set of zip codes as pop-out boxes. The Center for Urban Families is located in West Baltimore. The bottom right box is zip code 21217. That's where we're located. That red dot in the middle is where our building is located. 21217 is the community where Freddie Gray lived and where he encountered police and died in police custody. So as you'll see in this box, there are the number of what's called non-custodial parents, mostly dads, but not exclusively. In just that one zip code, there's an aggregate amount of about $28 million in back state-owned child support that's due to the state, right? And if you look across the top, just those few zip codes alone, there are that representative number of dads who owe $180 million in back child support. The triple threat is each one of those boxes is overlaid with child support debt, the incarceration rate, and the poverty rate. And if you have any appreciation for data, it's almost impossible for dads who are represented in this data to be able to advance themselves, to care for their children, and to be successful in community and even engage the labor market. One of the other data points that's not on here, if a dad was to take a job in these circumstances, the state can also garnish that person's W-2 income up to 65% in the state of Maryland. So you're really putting a person in a destitute situation. And one of our challenges has been to work with the state to advance reform of the child support system. And we've been fortunate to be able to get some movement in terms of legislation that has forced a self-sufficiency reserve. It has capped the amount of debt that can be accrued when someone is incarcerated. And the next level of work will be on the pass-through to make sure that child support that's paid goes to the family and not back to the state. So this is an example of how we have continued to work in partnership in Baltimore. Now, this next body of work is Mo talked about engaging the constituents, the fathers, and programming. And so we work with them to sit at the table with us and child support to co-design an intervention that if dads participated in our programming, if they participated in the labor force, they were able to get percentage of their debt removed as a condition for them participating in these positive activities, including being engaged in the lives of their children. The state, this model worked so good that the state then took it to the legislature. So let me back up a bit. So this was a model that was co-designed by dads in our fatherhood program, my programs team, and the state child support agency. Those were the three partners. The performance or the outcomes associated with this were so spectacular that the state then took it to the Maryland State Legislature. And the Maryland State Legislature then decided that this was something that they wanted to incorporate into law. And it was called the ROLL program that got converted by the legislature into what's called Maryland House Bill 1502, or the Step Up program. So then it became citywide as a law, as a pilot law. And this is one of the other challenges that we had. Although we had this ability to engage these dads in the programs, and we could get percentages off of their debt expunged, if you will. What this didn't do is to have the state to provide resources for us to do workforce training. So although we were helping them to achieve their objectives, it wasn't a reciprocal enough relationship where they were helping the providers to achieve their objectives. And we did it because it meant that the fathers were getting an opportunity to have debt relief and to be able to participate in the labor force and to be engaged in constructive activities. We have moved this to additional reform efforts that I mentioned before. There's much more to be done, but I did want to share examples of what it means to engage your state child support agency, even sometimes when the relationship can be prickly and it is sometimes difficult to engage with a bureaucracy. But I am of the mindset that if we're going to serve dads who have issues with child support, you have to have a relationship. You have to have a partnership with child support. And sometimes it's pushing the envelope beyond where they want to go. And reciprocally, they will push the envelope beyond where you would want it to go. But absolutely, it has to happen. Now, this last part of what I want to talk about is coming back to this notion of dismantling poverty, right? There are three groups that I want to mention here, right? And this is related to economic mobility, right? If we're working with a group of dads who are on a college campus, whether it's, it's the University of Texas, it's Tuskegee, it's Johns Hopkins, it's Morgan, it's any college or university you can think of, those dads are on a trajectory where they're going to be surrounded with support from career counselors. They're going to, even if they don't know what they ultimately want to do, they're going to be on a learning journey to help identify what their interests are and what their path to economic mobility and security will look like, right? And so case management for them is a relatively light touch, right? If Cynthia and I, if we happen to lose our jobs because of, maybe what we do is outdated and becomes obsolete, and we need to, we're displaced because of that, we probably have enough of a network, we have probably enough skills that case management for us may be a little heavier than for students, right? But, it's not going to be a heavy touch. But when we think about the dads who represent the data on that zip code slide that I showed, they have really, really high barriers to labor force attachment. So what is needed to work with them is not going to happen overnight. And I will admit that, I have been a part of trying to manufacture overnight or microwave success stories because I want to please a funder or I want to make a report look good. Not to do anything illegal, but just to say that, okay, we help somebody get a job at $14 an hour. That may meet somebody's standard, whether it's the U.S. Department of Labor or state labor or some other standard. But if we're talking about an adult who happens to be a parent, there's literally no way that $14 an hour, right, is going to be sufficient to help that person achieve economic stability and to stay there and continue to prosper, right? So, but that may be the reality of where some people have to start. But that means that we have to go deeper with them over a longer period of time. And the case management associated with that population group is much more intense, right? And if we want to help them get to another level of economic prosperity, then we can't be shy about talking about what it absolutely takes to be able to get there. So what we did, we took a step back and we looked at several data sets of what we refer to our clients as members, of our members, and we looked at the issues that they presented the most. And that had to do with child support, workforce development, housing, childcare, legal, financial capability, transportation, and a few others that I can't really call off the top of my head. And then we had a benchmark under that to determine for each one of those dimensions that apply to a particular member, where they were on a trajectory between being in crisis and thriving, right? And then case management was structured so that we sat down with a member and that person charted his or her own course, right? And that determined where they were against each one of those dimensions and what level of case management they need, particularly early on. And we should be doing case management if we're doing that intensive, that we're able to identify and sometimes predict when somebody may slip so that we can interject case management and ramp it back up and to support somebody who may have fallen short, right? And we said that when we interviewed our members, the most successful ones who were in spaces like I used to be back in the day, they said to us, the reason why we become so successful is because we could keep coming back over multiple years. And when we looked at the qualitative data along with the quantitative data, it said that the most successful people for the target population that we're working with those with high barriers, that it would take between 3 to 5 years. And our funding streams did not align with that. But that was the reality of what we knew it was going to take. So we decided that we would take a step back and we would codify what we were learning into a strategy that we called All In, which meant that we would go deeper with people over a longer period of time, 3 to 5 years, and we were going to overlay that with additional education and skills training that would allow a person to, based on labor market data, to create certifications in certain industry sectors that they then could go through with support from us that they could achieve realistically, independent of a criminal record, because we looked at the data to determine what sectors they could get in where a criminal record would not be a barrier. We also then began to say, critical to a person's success is that housing had to be a part of that. We are not a housing developer, and we don't want to be a housing developer. But what we did do is we connected with folks in the housing financing industry, and we began to pull together some resources that made available to select members who had achieved this all-in status, meaning they had grinded really hard, they took advantage of workforce opportunities, and they got to this level of economic stability, and they now were ready for more stable housing, in this case, home ownership. And so we began to work with them. We had lenders who were able to provide grants, not loans, of between $10,000 and $15,000 for home ownership financing for each individual. And what I want to share with you is this story about these two guys who went through our workforce development program called Strive. They did not know each other because they didn't go through the same cohort. And they were dads. They both had their own issues that they came to the table with. They were knuckleheads, right? And no different than me. And they deserved the opportunity and they wanted an opportunity. In this case, they each were able to take advantage of support from the center. They each built their own capacity to be able to do some things that they couldn't have done on their own because they weren't connected. They weren't networked. They didn't have a support system. And so this video will be an example of that. And I want to show it to you now. On the back end, I'll share a bit of an update on their story, and then look forward to joining you in Q&A with Dr. Cynthia Osborne.
Even when most people statistically would look at David and Devin and say, there's no way that they could ever become homeowners, they are living proof that it actually can happen.
Yeah, I had a problem with alcohol and substance.
I had an issue with arrogance and being cocky.
Penn State, I take Penn State. Home ownership changed my life. Children and family look different at me. And I look different at myself.
The Center for Urban Families is a nonprofit that was founded in 1999 in Baltimore solely for the purpose of strengthening urban communities by supporting fathers and families to achieve stability and economic success.
Going through the Strive program was humbling, like, no, you're just like everybody else around here. You don't have a job either. What's black man?
David and Devin are both on the other side of success now. But to get there, they both completed our Strive Job Readiness and Training program.
They could get me started to invest in me and my family. And the first thing, I had to get a house.
Homeownership is probably one of the most stabilizing forces for a community, especially a community like Baltimore, to communities who may not have seen investments for 20 or 30 years. Wells Fargo's LIFT program provides that pathway through housing counseling as well as the down payment assistance to help folks reach that milestone of homeownership.
They had me involved with an agent from Wells Fargo that helped me get my credit up.
Wells Fargo, City Lift, they gave me the down payment for the house, and I don't have to pay them back. After you stay here 5 years, you don't have to give them back their money. And that's a good thing, because it shows others that you can get something even when you don't have nothing.
At one point in time, he was the taker. Now he is the official giver. And he feels good because he always wants people to come to his house, because he has somewhere for you to go.
It's mine. It's mine. I can't get evicted. How'd you do with dance today?
That was good.
My daughter's 15, and if I was renting, I couldn't leave my apartment to my daughter. When I move somewhere else, this is hers. That's the difference. You know, now I actually have something.
Davey D. It just so happened the two of them ended up in houses next door to each other.
We went to the same program, but we didn't know each other, really. We became close when we became neighbors.
He's an entrepreneur. I like the way he was working for somebody, learned the ropes, opened up his own business.
My company is DWA Pet Service. I do better than another company because of where I come from.
He has the contract to do our building here in West Baltimore. Now the roles are reversed and he's teaching me, and so the gratification comes from knowing that somebody who has gone from being, almost feeling like they're worthless in society to someone who has the pride of home ownership and a business owner.
Oh, Davey D.
Having the backing, commitment, and investment from Wells Fargo made that possibility come true.
Let me fill in some of the gaps, right? First, about David Anderson. David, when he came to us, was transitioning out of a substance abuse treatment program, and he needed to start a job. So we got him a job with a pest control company where he could get his feet wet, he could earn an income, and we could think about what next steps were for him. Well, after a few months, his employer partner, so we have several employer partners, this particular employer partner who gave him a shot came to us and said, look, David's stealing my supplies. He's doing side jobs using my supplies. And we told him, you got to burn him. You got to fire him, right? You fire him, but we still got him, right? And he was reluctant. The employer he just wanted him to stop stealing. We was like, nope, we don't sanction that. Let him go. And so you got to bench him. So he benched him. David comes back and he's apologetic. He's defeated. His confidence is shot. And we still got him though. We're pumping him up. We're coaching him, and we're telling him, but you're going to burn for this. And David said, after some time, he said, I think I want to start my own pest control company. And we started chuckling because now he's going to put himself in the position that the employer was and going to have to hire people that may steal his stuff, right? And so we supported him in becoming an entrepreneur, purchasing trucks, which led to him purchasing his own. The other side of this is hard for me, but it's the reality of life. David, early this year, came to us and said, man, I've got terminal cancer. And he said, I don't have much time. And so I began to spend some time with him. And one day I was sitting on his porch and he said, man, I want all of my assets to go to my daughter, Anita, who you saw in the video, but I have no kind of plan to make that happen. So we immediately got with one of our pro bono attorneys, who at this point, David only had days to live. And the attorney went to the hospital with David, did all of the estate planning, and all of his assets had been transferred to his daughter, right? Now, so she has his business, she has his vehicles, she has his home, and now we're working with her to get her certification in pest control so that she can continue to do the work, the legacy of her dad. And that's what it means for us to be all in. This is how we begin to deal with equity. This is how we begin to deal with intergenerational wealth and make sure that resources that are accumulated at whatever level they are accumulated, they stay with the families. And most of what we do now today is about digging deeper with people, going with them for the long haul, so that these families can be healthy, they can be whole, both socially and economically, and that can drill down to what they're able to do with their children, preparing their children for school, so that they are on course to succeed at every grade level and not fall behind and have to play catch up. That is a big part of what we do. And I'm really honored to be a practitioner in the human services sector. I'm really honored that Cynthia would invite me to join you all for the 6th Annual Texas Fatherhood Summit, and that we have an opportunity to talk and share dialogue during the Q&A. And I'm open to any and all questions that you have, and even critique, because you can't get better at what you do to support fathers and families if you're going to be thin-skinned about people asking you hard questions about the work that you do. So with that, I want to say thank you again to the dads. Happy upcoming Father's Day. Make sure that you enjoy yourself, and thank you for the time with you today.
I'm muted. Joe, thank you so much for all of those great comments, and again, for the work that you do. And there are some questions that are coming in, and so I'm excited for us to engage in a conversation. And when you mention a topic like child support, it is something that makes a lot of people have a lot of thoughts, as you know.
How well I know.
So I want to start by kind of breaking fathers up into a couple of different groups. And there's a group of fathers that you serve, and some of these are the knuckleheads, like you say, or fathers who really struggle to keep a job, stay connected to their families, pay their child support. And so we want to make sure that we're really focused on that group of dads. But there's some questions that I want to make sure that we can get to about the group of fathers who are there. They want to stay connected to their children. They're paying their child support regularly, but they're often struggling to get access to their children or to make payments that, there's lack of flexibility or so forth if they do lose their job and that. So when the chat was kind of filling up with questions that go back and forth and kind of combine those two, and in the research and in services, we often disentangle those two groups because there's solutions that work kind of better for one or the other. So I just wanted to kind of put that on the table as we begin. So let's talk about your dads for a minute here. And, the fact that you brought together housing and jobs and all these things really speaks to the fact that there is no magic bullet. One of the questions that we had was, if a community really had to prioritize, say, 5 things in order to really try to provide for, strengthen these dads who really struggle, what would you say would be that kind of magic top 5 if you had to think of that?
I don't know if I would approach it with a magic top 5, but what I would say is because every individual is like a snowflake. Do you know that no two snowflakes are alike? Right? And so it's hard to overlay what works in one place or for one person with something that may work for a different place, right? And so I'm a firm believer that you've got to do the upfront assessment, and the data has to inform what you learn and know about your community. I am a Black man, right? I am not an authority on Black men, right? I have a set of experience, both academically and otherwise, that helped inform my knowledge around Black men, but I don't know all things about Black men, right? And I say that saying that I think that, really you have to be knowledgeable about your community from a practical, a data-informed standpoint. But I also think it has to be informed through qualitative or ethnographic approaches where you are actually meeting with people. And like Mo said, they are given the opportunity. They deserve the opportunity to sit at the table when you're talking about their data, right? Because sometimes data can be manipulated, right? And so it's really important to have, people with lived experience who are experts in their own lives and their own communities. And I would venture to say that if they're at the table and you're getting paid, they should be getting paid.
Yeah. I think that last point is so important. We need to start to think of them as consultants in the way that, for really improving services in the community. I appreciate that this idea that we can just say these are 5 or whatever the number is that will work anywhere is probably, a little too simplistic, wishful thinking, but really getting to know the community members is so important.
Well, so it's sort of analogous to somebody running for office, and they get elected. It's always, here's my agenda for the first 100 days. Everybody has an agenda for the first 100 days. Yeah, I guess that's meaningful, but what would be more meaningful to me is if dads really had an opportunity to sit with folks like Cynthia. And I know you've done a lot of work engaging dads in your research, so I really think that's key to any decisions around what really needs to happen in community.
Yeah. So I want to also, there's some questions that came in about why parents are separating to begin with. And how we would like to focus on policies that would allow parents to be able to stay together and have their children. And I know that this is a topic that has been discussed and you've been the center of for now several decades when the marriage initiative started. And there were lots of different things that we were trying to do. Can you speak to this a little bit about kind of what is it that allows fathers to stay connected to their families and mothers to stay connected? And what are some of those factors that kind of may tear them apart and lead them to needing child support or other sorts of individual services?
Man, relationships are hard, man. Really, I've been married to my wife 30 years, right? My wife would tell you annually, we're going to sit down and we're going to negotiate one more year. I don't even get a multi-year contract with my wife. It's an annual contract we have to negotiate, right? And so I do think we have to, in some ways, think about relationships as a business that has to be managed. Right? There are terms and conditions that go into any relationship, and each relationship is different. So the terms and conditions that work for me aren't necessarily applicable to somebody else's relationship. And what happens behind closed doors is often not the same thing you see from the outside, right? But I would say that, I just think we have not done a good job, particularly when it comes to never married parents, right? And that, and I think of co-parenting in this context of two different approaches to co-parenting. It's co-parenting that takes place in an intact relationship, whether you're married or you're not married, but the relationship is romantically intact. And there needs to be tools and ways in which we help to strengthen those relationships and help people to understand when you hit a road bump, it's not time to jump ship every time you hit a road bump, right? You got to work through that. And sometimes you need external support, right? In the form of mediation and marriage or relationship counseling, right? And that's important. And as it relates to married parents, when married parents decide to leave one another, we have family law that dictates what will take place with that breakup in terms of alimony, custody, visitation. Those things aren't in place for never married parents. So when that relationship disintegrates, they don't have family law, right? That kind of paves the way for a somewhat, amicable, breakup. And so they wing it, right? And often when they wing it, they get it wrong. And who suffers most when parents wing it that way are children. And so I think we also have to think about co-parenting as it relates to how do we create an exit strategy for low-income, never married parents who deserve the same kind of support that's mandated in family law for married parents whose relationships end in divorce.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, all of our child support laws or family law was all based on the idea that children came from married parents, and parents started together, married, and then separated, and we just haven't kept up. And some states are trying to do a little bit more. Here in Texas, we do provide a parenting time order for every child support order, regardless of the marital status. But it's there's nothing that's perfect, and our laws are very different for these two groups. But I really like what you said, that this is basically a business that needs to be managed on a year-to-year contract. And we do know that when our guys are more likely to have a job, less likely to have a record of incarceration, more likely to see themselves as valued in their children's lives, that those are things that keep them, in relationships more. So there are some policy structures that can help in the aggregate, but that each relationship really is unique. So I also want to talk a little bit about that other group of dads who long to see their children, but the child support system is often set up for more the mom than the dad, is their opinion at least. And in reality, that's what a lot of them experience. So can you talk to me about whether you have seen things work well that help to create better co-parenting relationships, or laws that are in place that can help to facilitate better kind of integration and parenting time among those dads who really do want to see their kids?
Yeah, this is new territory for us in the human services sector. Even if you think about the federal government's intervention around access and visitation. So the federal government through child support has an access and visitation program. They have a fund. That fund is about $10 million. It's been about $10 million a year since 1999, right? It hasn't gone up at all, right? To have a national fund that's only $10 million is, that's kind of it's kind of ridiculous, right?
Yeah, it's a rounding error. Yeah.
It is. And we've also socialized men in our society to be providers and be protectors, to go to work and go to war, generally speaking, right? And if you happen to fall short and need help, you're considered less than if you are asking for help. And our social welfare policy, our social welfare system, our schools of social work, we don't even produce helping professionals that come out of schools of social work with competencies around engaging dads or men, right? I mean, it's the only, there may be others, but the one that I do know of is the School of Social Work at Hunter College that has a fatherhood curriculum for aspiring helping professionals. So they're building competency for people to come into the sector, into the field, to be able to help address the needs of dads. But when it comes to these other issues, and child support is such a punitive approach to families, right? It is for the benefit of children, right? But if you tell me that overloading somebody who is responsible for a child with a bunch of debt that can't ever be paid, right? Never, right? Most financial institutions, if you go up on your credit card like that, the credit card company would consider uncollectible debt and wipe it off the books, right? Yep. And take whatever tax break they can get associated with that. But we don't do that. And I think we have to think more about what it means to create these kind of policies, get away from the archaic way in which we, even in our welfare program, we have these archaic work requirements for people to receive a public benefit when they're in need the most. And the last thing I'll say, there's a practice within our public benefit system that when a family that is receiving public benefits is intact, so they're romantically together, but they don't reside together, the system will automatically, if the custodial parent is going to receive public benefits, automatically refer the dad to child support when that is not the intent of the family. It's a practice. We've actually gone to Congress and looked at the Congressional Research Service, look at it to say, this is a policy. They said, no, this is not a policy. There's no history of it being in policy. It is an archaic practice that just has gone on. And so these are some of the things that have gone on. But as we think about pass-through legislation that allows money that's paid by dad to go directly to the family when public benefits are encountered. And then for every dad who wants to be engaged in the life of your child, I know how difficult it can be if you have resources or you don't have resources, particularly when the relationship does not go well.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are states that are trying to do things a little bit differently. And the research is still a little bit out on whether shared parenting, 50-50 custody, those things are going to work effectively. So in Texas, we still have a percentage of income for child support, which is just 20% of father's net resources for one child and goes up 5 percentage points. But a lot of states do have these income share models where they take each parent's income into consideration. They think about what it actually costs to raise a kid. They split that up. What are you seeing in terms of trends or of things that are working that are helping to set more realistic orders, more fair orders that ultimately will allow parents to pay them and children to actually reap the benefits?
Yeah, in Maryland, we actually worked with our state legislature to get them to set realistic orders. And it's now in law. Right. It took a lot of, work with our legislator, and advocates had to come together. We had to align people who weren't natural allies to work on this. But I do think when we think about, policies like that, and we think about two-generation or whole family approaches to serving the entire family, and we allow that to be the driver of how we think about public policy, then we tend to have people who will look at it a lot differently. And I would say, particularly to those who are decision makers, policy makers, if you ever get a chance to sit in on a fatherhood program, and not as an observer, but as a participant, and really get a chance to see the power of what can happen when fatherhood participants come together and are talking in sync about what they want to do for their families and their community is one of the most beautiful things that we could do as a society. Come out of your ivory tower, sit in.
Yeah, I mean, you really get to see that there are very few people out there who don't want to be engaged with their children. They may struggle to do it, but at the end of the day, if they can value themselves as fathers, they are there for their kids. And Joe, thank you so much for joining us today and for the just all of the great work that you do to lead policy change and especially change the lives of the men that you serve. So thank you for taking time out of your very busy day to join us, and a happy Father's Day to you on Sunday as well.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for all that you and the state of Texas have done to inform what's happening in other places around the country. Congratulations, Texas.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.